1.
Welcome to HBTV. I'm a philosopher who advocates Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. And every Monday, I take up questions from a unique and controversial perspective. And today, Nikos, we have a special format.
Yes, today is a Q&A. So as we said in the past, members of Ayn Rand Center UK have priority on sending written questions before the show. So we have a queue of these questions and Harry is going to address them today. We will try also to address super chat questions. So feel free to send your two super chats and we're going to do our best for Harry to answer all of them. So without further delay, let's jump in because there are many questions and very good questions. Question number 1. The context for our friend is how to apply objectivism in today's world. And he asks, or she, can you share advice on how best to live as an objectivist in a mixed economy with significant and expanding governmental control? In particular, where to comply and when to dissent?
Always dissent. Dissent is a matter of expressing your viewpoint when it is not rude, or uncalled for, inappropriate to do that. I mean, you don't go up to people, hi, I'm Harry Binswanger, I don't agree with these immigration controls, or whatever it is. But dissent means, it means to state your disagreement. So you should always do that. Never self-censor. Comply. Virtually always comply because they've got the guns. How to best live as an objectivist in a mixed economy with significant, well, several things. One is hire lawyers if you're in business. The other is actually to dissent, be outspoken. They don't go after the outspoken ones. If you read Atlas Shrugged, you see the story of when Hank Rearden began to denounce the government, they were afraid to go after him. Now, you have to do it as a mature, civilized adult, stating reasons, not as some embarrassing, wild-eyed kid. Okay, so if you're a kid, you have to learn some more, probably. But the other thing I would say is get hooked into the objectivist community, but I want to warn about something about that. In other words, I do have friendships and relationships with people who aren't objectivists, but most of my time is spent talking to objectivists, and that's a better situation if they're real objectivists. The other thing is that if you're a businessman hiring someone, do not use adherence to objectivism as your hiring criterion. If you have two people who are equally qualified and equally innovative and thoughtful and so forth, and one of them is in agreement with the philosophy he says, okay, you might want to throw the balance to that. But I know a lot of, or several cases of businessmen and entrepreneurs who thought it'd be a good idea to hire people who call themselves objectivists. And it isn't. It's some combination of they're not really objectivists and they'll cheat you. I've seen that happen more than once. And they are objectivists, but they're not that bright or that innovative or that dedicated. So don't tip the scales if you're hiring to hire an objectivist. But in terms of who you want to talk to and spend time with, I would find people you like who also agree with your ideas.
Question number 2. What does the identity of consciousness mean? If our consciousness perceived reality in a particular way, wouldn't that imply subjectivism?
Well, this is like the question of questions. Easy to answer, though, but that you're asking this question is a good sign. Let's take the second part first, because I think it needs to be put to rest before we get to the first part. If her consciousness perceived reality in a particular way, wouldn't that imply subjectivism? Well, let's apply that to thermometers. If a thermometer registers the heat in a particular way, wouldn't that make it not really measuring the heat, but only the heat as an alcohol thermometer registers it, or a mercury thermometer, or a digital thermocouple? If we set up radar installation to detect incoming missiles, we can't have it use a particular material and a particular frequency and operate at a specific power rating and so forth, because any of those particular items of identity would disqualify the radar. It has to operate as radar in general. In fact, even radar is just one way of a particular way of gaining information about reality. Why isn't it LiDAR? Why isn't it sonar? Why isn't it visual, image processing? So the question you raise is the question that Kant raised. And of course, he didn't really raise it. It's the answer that he gave. Because our consciousnesses work in a specific way, they can't see reality, only the reality as it's understood in that way, or perceived in that way. And that is the fundamental error in the last 200 years. That's what's behind, say, critical race theory. That's what's behind Trump. That's what's behind everything that's wrong with the modern world. The idea that your mind is not capable of knowing reality because it's your mind. It can't work because it works somehow. Only if it worked no-how, by no specific means, would it be valid. But what is the standard you're applying? Plato. Or even worse, the religion. Only if we had a revelation know-how could we trust it. But since we see the world through our senses and think the world through our minds, we can't trust it. Ayn Rand gave the immortal description of this view, the kind of expose. Man is blind because he has eyes. He's deaf because he has ears. The means of awareness is your means of awareness. It's not something blocking you from awareness. And every means is a specific means. So again, another analogy I like to give is we can't really get to New York City. We can only get to New York City as it is when you land at JFK, or New York City as it is when you drive to it on I-95, or New York City as it is when you disembark your boat when you land on the piers. We can't get to the real New York City, only the New York City as reached by a particular way. Well, of course, that's absurd. The ways are all ways of reaching the same thing. Eyes and ears and bat echolocation are organs for knowing reality. They're different ways of contacting reality, but they are what enable the organism to perceive reality. Now, I think part of this is the word subjectivism. The wording here is, if our consciousness perceive reality in a particular way, wouldn't that imply subjectivism? What do you mean by subjectivism? Subjectivism means, in philosophy, the idea that reality has no identity except what we give it. Wishes make it so. Ignorance is bliss. If I don't see it, it's not there. What you don't know can't hurt you. Getting it out of your mind gets it out of being. To be is to be perceived, said Bishop Berkeley. Esse est percipi. To be is to be perceived. And of course, this is the operating slogan of a schizophrenic or psychotic. They believe that their consciousnesses control reality. So subjectivism is the idea that there's no reality out there. There's just our internal states. Our minds are cut off from reality. Well, how do you know there is a reality or a mind, if that's true? So subjectivism does not mean, well, everybody has his own slant on things, which could be an innocuous, even a pleasant statement. Pleasant in the sense of people are a little bit different. They see things in a different way. They come to a little bit different conclusions. They don't necessarily contradict each other, but it's nice that everyone does not have exactly the same values and exactly the same thoughts. We're not all robots vocalizing in unison. So that kind of subjectivism is not a problem. But subjectivism in philosophy, and as I think the question means it, is there is no truth. There's only your truth and his truth. But actually, if there's only your truth, there is no him. Subjectivism to be semi-consistent has to say, well, I don't know if there are any other people or consciousnesses. They're just images in my mind. I don't know what's out there, if there are any. So it's the subject without the object. But it's self-evident that you have a subject knowing an object. Go ahead.
And here's a follow-up that we received. What is consciousness if it's not matter that we know follows simply?
All right, well, that's a different question, Nico. So let's get that later, because the first part of the question, what does the identity of consciousness mean? So the idea, just to summarize, the idea that perception by means is non-perception is a contradictory and baseless claim. Okay, what does the identity of consciousness mean? It means three things, broadly. Free will for conceptual consciousness, free will. Second, that the senses are the basis of all further knowledge. An animal can't go further than its senses, but human beings can apply logic to process sensory material, and that's reason. And the third thing is something that Ayn Rand bases her whole epistemology on, the principle of unit economy. You can only hold so much material in full conscious focus at once. So for instance, if you're presented with a deck of cards, 2 decks of cards, and imagine them spread out on a table. One of them has a card missing. You can't just look at that and say, oh, this one has 51 cards, that one has 52, so there's something missing from this deck. You have to count them. On the other hand, I'm now holding up different quantities of fingers in one hand and the other hand. You don't need to count those. That's perceptually given. But beyond about 6, you can't distinguish visually anymore the difference between quantities. I have trouble with 6. Now, I mean, 6 that are not neatly arranged for you and lined up one with the other, but like imagine a bowl of 7 peas all mixed together and a bowl of 7 pencils or 6 pencils. It wouldn't be in a bowl, would it? A pencil holder of 6 pencils. You can't grasp on a perceptual level which one has more. I mean, maybe you can if you're really good, but I can't do that. But 2 P's versus 1 pencil or the other way around, we can all get. So there's a need to reduce the number of units that are held in awareness at a given time. And that's the whole key to human psychoepistemology, she calls it, the man's conceptual level of functioning. All through and through is about reducing the number of units you have to hold in mind so that you can hold things wholesale, not retail. So for instance, a table, one word that brings up information about every one of the millions or hundreds of millions of tables I don't know if you encounter hundreds maybe, but that there have been made, billions probably, that there have been made and will ever be made. So it is a process of expanding the range of awareness by reducing the number of units, letting some units stand for an unlimited number of others. That's what an abstraction or a concept is. So those are the 3 things that the identity of consciousness means that I can think of after some consideration to this topic. Free will for human beings in their use of reason. Perception is the base and source of all information. That is sensory observation. And the principle of unit economy, reducing the need to reduce to economize on units. So that's what it means. And none of those turns anything subjective. Do you want to do the follow-up or?
Yes, let's do the follow-up. So
Sure.
The follow-up asks, it starts in the same way, what is consciousness, but then says, if it's not a matter that we know follows simple cause and effect, then what is it made of? So what is consciousness made of, is if not a simple matter that follows cause and effect?
Look at all the assumptions built into that question. It assumes consciousness is made of something. I think the reason why consciousness has free will is that it isn't made of anything. What things are made of is physical stuff. Consciousness is an activity. It's not made of stuff. It's not a thing in your head. It's not your brain. Consciousness is seeing, smelling, tasting, imagining, desiring. It's all actions. Thinking, deducing, defining, smelling. It's all those actions. Those are all actions of consciousness. Consciousness is just an umbrella term for all those things. Now, if they're not made of matter, well, to be made of matter is that which makes up things. So another way of saying it is, if it's not a thing, what is it? Well, it's an activity of an organism, but beyond that, I can't say. It's indefinable. Or it's definable only ostensively, meaning by giving examples, as I did, seeing, smelling, hearing, thinking, deducing. All those are actions of you, of your consciousness. And you can't reduce the state of, what about the raw inner state that is all those things? You can't break that down into anything else, because the 2 big primaries in reality are existence, the thing you know, the world, the universe, and consciousness, your activity of grasping, imagining, even evading that thing, that existence. So it's one of the 2 basic phenomena in the universe. And you can't reduce one to the other. So it's not matter. Matter is the stuff. We think it's ultimately quarks, or in my day it was protons, electrons, and other subatomic particles. Now it's quarks. that make up the universe, to make up things in the universe, physical, touchable things. And consciousness is not a thing, it's an activity of a living organism. And that is the answer to the free will thing that we're a question that we're going to get into in a minute. So you check your premises.
Okay. So let's have a look at the super chats. Thank you, Marilyn, Robert. So Marilyn mentions, related to what you said earlier about employment, that in her early 20s, she disagreed with her boss about something she said. And she said, I don't think it's the right way to handle it, but you're the boss, so I'll do what you say. He wanted me to agree, not just to do it. And in a way, that's a good thing, that your boss wants you to understand what.
Yeah. Now that's a different thing. In all your knowledge and thinking, you have to distinguish force versus cooperation. So when I said dissent, I had in mind, as I think the questioner did, dissent with government regulations and rules and laws. I didn't mean dissent from somebody, say, who believes in God. Even then, you shouldn't. If somebody tries to get you to agree with his wrong view, whatever it is, that creamy peanut butter is more tasty than crunchy peanut butter. I mean, that's about as subjective as you can get, but I wouldn't agree to that. But it doesn't mean I'm out grabbing people by the collar and saying, listen, you got to use chunky peanut butter. My wife likes creamy peanut butter, not chunky, and we get along fine, because that is an optional thing. But let's say, trying to think of something in computers that I have a view on that's not, well, I think USB-C is better than USB-A or B. And I think they're poorly designed all of them, plugs are very poorly designed. I wouldn't withhold that information, but that's not what we're talking about when we talk about dissent. We're talking about the government says everyone must stay in their homes and not go out because there's COVID. I think, pretty far-fetched, but that could happen, right? Comply unless you can get away with it, but don't say you agree with it when you don't. Now, if your boss wants you, your boss is someone that you've chosen to do work for in exchange for payment. He's not your boss, in the sense of the policeman and the Congress are your bosses to an astonishing extent today. They shouldn't be. But the person that hired you and can fire you is in a very different category. You have chosen to work with him. Now, he may or may not want to understand your viewpoint on things. That's his prerogative. He's paying you. So I understand that there are cases where bosses are irrational, where I don't want to hear it, don't tell me, just do it my way. And there are cases where the boss is rational and is saying, look, there's probably 7 different ways of doing it. Yours may be slightly better, but I don't have time to investigate all these things. It's not going to make that much difference. So let's move on. I haven't got time. Or anywhere in between, or it could be any of a number of different attitudes, but professionalism means that you do not forget who's working for whom. So that's a different thing.
Let's go to one of the pre-submitted questions, and then we'll go back to the super chats. Even if I recognize a choice to think, what is the proof that this choice is a matter of free will and not a result of my nature or the environment?
The fact that you asked the question. If you didn't have free will, you couldn't ask that question. You would simply be writing what you were programmed to write and hearing and processing whatever I say in the way you were determined by whatever your nature and or environment, to hear it and process it the way you do, and you would have no choice. So the existence of a question about which you're going to think and decide presupposes that you control your mind. Now, let me give you a stark contrast. So imagine a guy with a gun in his head. There's a bad guy with a gun at Joe's head, okay? And somebody comes up to Joe. Of course, you wouldn't do that. You'd run in terror. But comes up to Joe and says, Joe, do you believe that you are determined and run by something, or do you have free will and can you speak your mind? The guy with the gun writes a note, hands it to Joe. Joe looks at it, reads it. No, I am entirely free to speak my own mind. And then the person says, well, what about the guy with the gun on you? Aren't you afraid that he will shoot you if you displease him? Joe looks at the guy with the gun. He writes a little something, a piece of hands. Oh, no, I'm not afraid at all. I know that this, you see how cognitively worthless anything you're forced to say is, even about whether you're forced to say it. So the presupposition of any objective, we talk about subjective, but the presupposition of any objective, conceptual, rational thinking process is that you are free to look at the facts, that nothing makes you, like, oh, you know how people say, well, I was brought up to think that you shouldn't not honor the flag. You should honor the flag. Or I was brought up to believe you don't say boastful things about yourself. Or I was brought up to be a Baptist. What's the relevance of that? Either you agree with it and you've got reasons, or you don't. I was brought up to be an observant Jew, but I'm not, because it's bad. It's false and destructive. So if your environment makes you think what you think, you're like the person with that gun at his head, only it's not physical force of the threat of destruction. It's the way your brain is wired, or the way your teachers made you think. So the fact that you're asking the question shows that you are on the premise of you have free will. Now that's an enlightening answer, but let me ask you directly. Because the proof of free will, there is no proof of free will. It's an axiom. And the argument went through shows that it's an axiom. It cannot be meaningfully denied. The denial presupposes that you have a mind and can see what's the case. But the axioms are self-evident to observation. How do I know that there is a world out there? I see it. How do I know that I'm conscious? I see it. So how do I know I have free will? Well, perform a couple of experiments. Let's take an easy one. What topic are we now discussing?
Free will.
You probably remember free will, right? From 3 seconds ago, right? You remember that. Okay. Now, what was the name of your second grade teacher? And did she wear glasses or not? And what did you have for lunch 5 years ago on this day? Now, some of those, you could work at, right? You say, oh, my second grade teacher, let's see. And you do certain things. Mary had a little lamb, right? comes to you automatically. What is 17 times 25? You have to work at it. Someone comes in with a huge, heavy book that you don't know what on earth is this. You have certain emotions. What is that? What is he doing? Where did that come from? What kind of, is that a book? What is it? This is strange. The emotions, the automatized memories come without effort, but there are a lot of things that take effort. They come down to things that you have to run your mind to do rather than the mind doing it, putting itself in operation in that regard. So much in the mind is automatized and takes no effort. 2 times 3 is, didn't take any effort to hear 6 in your mind. But again, 17 times 25, I don't even know what that is, but I know a procedure that I can do in my head to figure it out. So there are things that take effort and there are things that don't. That difference is a difference between what's deterministic, given your past history, what's automatic, not volitional, and what you have to do by hand, which takes effort and where you can fail at it. I could bring up another phenomenon, but I think that's enough. So that's the introspective awareness, the difference between Mary Had a Little and what is the name of your second grade teacher, if you can begin to get that. That's the obvious experience that we all have of things that take effort and things that don't.
Let's go to super chats now, and then we'll go back to the pre-submitted question. By the way, I have something like 10 more pre-submitted questions.
I'm going to go faster now because those were hard questions.
Yeah, and the one that is coming is even harder. So, okay. So thank you, Marilyn, for the clarification and the super chat. So question now by Stephen. Is it correct to say that consciousness is not, quote, in time due to not being, quote, in space, as time is a measure of relative motion, but is casually ordered thereby? Implications for formation of memories versus concepts.
No. Next. So that didn't take long.
No.
Consciousness, he's right. Consciousness is not in space, but that doesn't mean it's not in time, because it is in time. I mean, it's one thing to kind of philosophically analyze it. You can't say, because time is a measurement of physical change and consciousness is not physical, so its changes are not in time. That's a kind of thinking we call rationalism. It's deduction in a void floating in the air. The basic way, how do you know time is a measurement of physical things? Why can't it be a measurement of psychological things? But even aside from that, we know that, say, clock ticks are physically caused regular uniform motion, and they measure time. And we also know that we experience the passage of time. Things happen to us in accordance with those clock ticks. In accordance is not the right word. While that clock is ticking. So I began talking on this show less than an hour ago and more than a minute ago. I'd have to look at my watch to get it more precise, but that's a measurement based on physical time of what's been going on in my mind, evidenced in my behavior, but I see it from the inside because it's my mind. So no, it's a artificial problem. It's not a real problem.
One more question from the pre-submitted ones, and then back to super chats. Can one consistently hold the ideas that one, we have free will, and two, the standard of value is the collective. So can we hold these two at the same time? We have free will.
No.
The standard of value is the collective.
No. The essence of collectivism is group determinism, that the individual is what he is and does what he does because of his group membership in some collective. If you take that away, the whole system of collectivism collapses. And I learned this, maybe this won't be too interesting, but I used to teach college. And one year, about 1976, I got to teach a course on political philosophy. So I organized it around individualism versus collectivism. And in reading the collectivist arguments, because I had to give both sides, I came face to face with the individual as a cell in the body of society. And I asked myself, well, what is the difference between the individual's relationship to society and a cell's relationship to your body? And it instantly became clear to me. You don't have to agree with anything that anybody says. If you agree, it's because that's your choice. Even the conformist chooses to conform. He chooses not to think about it and to go the easiest path. Okay, they must know. But that's not the relationship of a organism to a cell that in that organism, the demands of the whole dictate what happens, dictates what the cell is and what will happen to it insofar as the whole can control. So you are not in relation to other people the way a cell in your pancreas is to your whole phenotype. It's just not, and the difference is free will. You have a mind, you're in charge of that mind, you can be, and whether you use it or not is up to you.
Okay.
Collectivism is determinism.
Collectivism is determinism. So, question from Kelsey. I'm going to paraphrase Kelsey, the second part, because syntactically it confused me a bit. So, Dr. Binswanger, what is the essential meaning of objectivism, as Dr. Peikoff writes in his OPAR chapter on objectivity? How does this contrast with calling good philosophically objective value art as subjective?
I don't get that last part.
Yeah, Casey, if you can repost the last part, we're gonna ask Dr. Binswanger again. But I assume he means how can your judgment be subjective? But let's start with the first part.
Okay.
What is the essential meaning of objectivism, as Dr. Peikoff writes in his OPAR chapter on objectivity?
That objectivity is volitional, free will, adherence to reality, according with your nature and the nature of reality. So it's neither Ayn Rand discovered that there were three possibilities where all previous philosophers, and I include Aristotle, who was the best, recognized only two. And this is why it's named objectivism. It used to be thought, well, look, either you admit that there's truth and it's absolute, or you say, no, if there's a truth, we don't know it, and we live inside our minds, and what's true for you is, so it's either you accept the object out there are real, in which case your mind becomes passive. Or if you say it's active, then it departs from what's out there. So the two categories that were recognized were, you could call it the mystic and the skeptic. The revelations of an absolute truth to which you must submit versus there is no truth, there are no answers. It's every man for himself in a unknowable maybe universe, but maybe it's all in the matrix. Right. So those are the only two, and you can go through every philosopher and identify is he on the side of the intrinsic, as we call it, or the subjective. Ayn Rand came up with the objective, which is the facts of reality as grasped by a volitional consciousness. So it's neither just what's out there with your mind being a nothing, or what's in here and inside your mind with what's out there being nothing. And values is a good example of the false dichotomy. The two schools were, well, look, either there is an absolute morality and you just have to do stuff whether you like it or not. And if you don't do your duty, you're bad. And if you do your duty, well, you may be good if you do certain things, do it from a certain perspective, a certain way. And then the other side, like Nietzsche or Hume or the skeptics and generals, no, when we say something good is good, all we mean is, I like it. When we say something's bad, all we mean, I don't like that. It's called the boo-hara theory of evil and good, of morality. And Ayn Rand said, no, there's first a basic choice. Do you want to live? And that's up to you. If you don't, kill yourself. But if you choose to live, reality dictates the right way to live. There's only one right way to live. Now, that one right way leaves options. So when one is, kind of equivocal. There's a right way or a set of right ways. That's a better way of putting it. A set of right ways and a very large set of wrong ways. And the standard for right and wrong there is the law of causality. If you like drugs and you take drugs, you're going to kill yourself. If you steal and cheat and lie, you're going to make war on reality and on every other human being, and you're going to be miserable if not dead. So it's not true that the choice is, the two alternatives are, don't think, just obey, follow the 10 Commandments, or there's no right and wrong, it's whatever you feel like. If you choose to live, you have to use your mind to find out how to live. And the good and the right are that which promotes your survival as the kind of being you are, a rational animal. The bad is anything that in principle destroys that. And that is not subjective, and it's not independent of you like a commandment from God. If you want to live, you have to do certain things.
We got the follow-up, Harry, so I'll read it now. How does this contrast, so what you explain now, how does this contrast with calling philosophically objective value, such as good art, subjective?
I can't parse that question. What do colleagues have to?
So
she's saying, how does this contrast with the popular view in the intellectual world that it's subjective?
No, I think also Rand, for example, in Capitalism, Their Known Ideal, says that there is such thing as objective value, but how you evaluate it in a way is subjective. You cannot say that there's this, for example.
Let me clear that up. I think what you and the question are getting at is the distinction between subjective and optional. subjective is a bad term. That is a term for a bad thing. It's a good term, qua term, but it's a term for a specific way of behaving where you only think about yourself, not yourself in reality, but you only think about your emotions. That's all that counts to you. And other people's rights or the law of cause and effect, you don't care about it. Like Dostoevsky's Underground Man said, what do I care if 2 and 2 is 4 or a wall is a wall? I don't like it. I don't want it. So that's subjectivism. The fact that you have to have a career, for instance, is objective. It comes from your nature as the kind of living organism you are. That does not mean everybody has to be a programmer or everybody has to be a barber. The choice of what line of productive work you will support your life through is personal and optional. It's not subjective. If you choose your career by a whim, you're going to be in big trouble. But it's not laid out by the principles of morality because it's different for different people. But there are certain principles you can apply in picking a career and picking a line of work, such as it should be challenging to you, but not beyond your capabilities and not too easy. It should be something that you can make a living at. It should be something that there are resources for you that you can find to succeed in that endeavor in today's world. Generally, it should cause you to use your mind in the way that you like to use it. For instance, I'll give you an example. I spent 15 years on my book, How We Know. Now, that was not 15 years of 8 hours a day. There were whole years when I didn't do anything on it. It was on my mind. I was working on it, thinking about it. But nevertheless, it's a very long-range project. I have a very good friend who had a job as a lawyer where she liked the fact that things came up and she gave a quick answer and disposed of them. Now, that's completely optional. There's nothing that says you have to like long projects that don't reach fulfillment for years, or you have to like things that get done in an hour. That's an individual difference. But if you ignore what you like, what is the way you're used to functioning and think is your best way of functioning, things may go badly for you. So it's not subjective.
Good.
It's personal and optional, not once you said subjective, you've said invalid, emotionalistic, defying reality. That's what subjective means.
And our friend sends a further clarification and says, for example, the experience of good art. So I assume subjective means personal, something that has to do with your values.
Personal, yeah. See, when I say this is what subjective means, I'm applying the objectivist epistemology and saying that. It's not like, well, everybody knows that subjective means what I'm saying it means, not the merely personal. You have to come to a decision about how you're going to use terms. I use the term subjective to make a contrast with objective. So if it's subjective, it's the destruction of the objective. You could use some other term for that, for the subjective, and use subjective to mean what I mean by personally objective. Okay, so what a person responds to in art is very idiosyncratic. It has to do with that person's sense of life. It has to do with the sum of that person's experiences and how that person in particular processed it. So not everybody will like the same artworks. everybody can come to an objective agreement on what is good art. Even there, it's not easy, but you can. But it is never going to be the truth, nor would it be desirable to be true, that everybody has the same kind of reaction to the same artwork. This gets into the objectivist theory of art, which I haven't talked about, but it comes back to, what do you mean by subjective?
So let's switch gears now completely. Why do you think that artificial intelligence is an invalid term and field?
Well, it's not an invalid field. It's a very valid field, as it's kind of evolved. In the old days, artificial intelligence was the attempt to make computers that could think. That's not what it means anymore, and that's invalid. Computers can't think because they can't perceive. They can't perceive because they aren't alive. But what artificial intelligence means now is self-improving by human standards, computation based upon positive feedback loops. And that's a very good thing and has a tremendous potential. It's like a little evolution, little natural selection. Well, it's really artificial selection. The programmer sets the parameters of what he considers the goal, and then the computer processes tons and tons of data to slowly find its way towards a set of settings that optimizes that goal. I've written a program that does that. Not that a million other people haven't also done it, and it's in the book Gödel, Escher, and Bach, not the actual lines of code, but the idea of it. And it's used in relation to showing how evolution works by natural selection, but you can also take it as the archetype of artificial intelligence. So yeah, it's a bad term. I think it's lost its sting. I don't think anybody really thinks that these systems are intelligent. They think that they are have positive feedback loops so their performance improves towards a goal that's set for them by the programmers. So no, I don't have any objection. I'm in favor of it. Just the term used to be very misleading. But there's a lot of terms like that for stuff in computers. Computer memory. Well, it doesn't have any actual memory. Computer, you read a file. The computer reads a file. Computer shows you stuff. Computer has a file. Now, if you get all these things are metaphors, but understandable metaphors. So if you get literal, the computer cannot even add. Computers do not add. Adding machines do not add. Fingers don't add. You can count on your fingers and do addition by counting up, but your fingers can't add. A machine can whir gears, an adding machine, and produce a turn of the dial that amounts to the solution to an addition problem, but it doesn't add. Addition is a mental process. So what computers do is they move high and low voltages around according to the wiring of transistors and the hardwiring and soft wiring, so to speak. We interpret it as adding. So like right now I'm looking at Nikos's image on Zoom, but it's not an image for the computer. It's a set of RGB numbers. Well, it's not even that. It's a set of illuminated spots and non-illuminated less illuminated spots, where the illumination can be from the red phosphor, the green, or the blue, and they're different degrees. There's no picture in the computer. That's the way we look at it. There's no knowledge in books. Please don't quote me on that. What there is in books is ink on paper. Now, we can read it and understand it because we set up symbols to mean something. But in terms of the books, it's just ink on paper.
Okay, people, thanks so much for the super chats, but don't send any more because we're running out of time. So I'm gonna read. These are the last two super chats and one more question, and then we are done. Okay, is time dilation a rationalistic conception? Where does an Einstein and quantum mechanics go wrong?
I don't have a mature answer on that. The young Harry Binswanger was very much against time dilation. And there are definite problems with even reconciling Einstein and quantum. And physicists will tell you this, there's a contradiction between general relativity and quantum, or maybe it's special relativity and quantum mechanics. The aspect experiments, double delayed choice, reveal faster than light transmission of information, which is supposed to be impossible. Now they say, oh no, it doesn't really if you interpret it this way, but it does. I mean, I'm going by people who know more than I do in the field. So there's some misconceptualizations that clearly have gone on. They found real phenomena. It's a big advance. Einstein and quantum discoveries of facts are a big advance, but the interpretation that's been given to them needs philosophical work. In fact, I think mathematics needs that. That's what my next goal is. Infinity, for instance, and precision both have been completely misconstrued. The whole relation of math to reality has been misconstrued. But I don't have a single, line of math that I think as math, that I would change. I don't think that 2 and 2 is 5, no. And I don't think that the phenomena that the physicists are looking at is unreal, but they just are interpreting it in a philosophically corrupted way. So the problem is qua philosophers and qua very theoretical physics people.
Penultimate question. I understand objectivism holds man is born tabula rasa, but nevertheless can have personality traits or innate tendencies or aptitudes. Parenthesis by me, an example would be Mozart, that was a talent from the age of 3 or something. So what are these latter qualities, if not some sort of pre-programming, something written on the tabula? Great question, whoever submitted this.
Yeah, all right, let's see how I can do it quickly. You have to distinguish the equipment from the content of the equipment, like a computer. Okay, so you think of a computer coming out of Intel or Microsoft. Well, Microsoft doesn't mean an Apple computer. Take the Apple computer that is available at your friendly Apple store, the iMac or something, MacBook Pro. Now think of the first Apple computer. Well, the second really, the Apple II was the first one that anyone saw. The potentialities of the iMac or MacBook Pro are, I would estimate, 1 billion-fold greater. Just in terms of memory, and they didn't have hard drives, the Apple II. So you understand that there is fantastically more powerful computers. But that is not to say that they come out of the factory with data in them. Now, it's a little tricky because they do use proms and ROMs where they write data. But even those ROM chips didn't have data in them until data was put in them. So it may be that the computer of today, when you turn it on and load in an operating system, is like Mozart. And the computers back then did not have the capabilities of the Mozart, the genius. They weren't genius level hardware. But that says nothing about the software, the data, and the software that's stored in them. They don't have that until it's put there. So no, the original statement is wrong about, if you could read it again, about personality types. No, there are no inborn personality types. What else did he say?
Personality traits or innate tendencies or aptitudes.
No. You might have, like, say you take your Mac and you do a lot of Zoom conferencing. That doesn't mean the Mac has an innate aptitude for Zoom conferencing. It is more powerful across the board. So of course it can do Zoom conferencing better. But if you had used it in some other way, like for statistical analysis, you would think, oh, it has an aptitude for statistical analysis. So I think intelligence is pretty general. Now, I'd be willing to consider very narrow perceptual aptitudes. I'd lean against them, and I have in mind music. Since Mozart was brought up, I think it looks like some people have a wiring of their brain that's better equipped, makes them better if they use it at music, at perceiving and discriminating musical notes and scales. I doubt it. I think it's very early childhood learning. But it's conceivable that one little talent, not little, but one defined talent like that would be better. Some brains would be better at it than other brains, but not at other things, where you could have a brain that would be good for processing musical sounds or whatever it is, that wouldn't translate into generally more intelligent, more able to do everything. I don't think so, but that would be the closest you can get. But in terms of, like Einstein or Ayn Rand or Shakespeare or Bill Gates or anything, those are just some combination of more powerful hardware and what I think looms much, much, much larger, better software, that is their automatized material, because of the choices they made. So early choices have leave deep imprints. And the Mozart obviously was listening to music from a very early age. Incidentally, the Mozart stuff he did at 3 is not good. I mean, music, people like Mozart will tell you that, no, it's not particularly good at all. Doesn't stink, but it's just kind of obvious and twinkle, twinkle, little starish kind of things. That isn't literally it, but so it's not, you can't imagine him coming out and doing opera at age 3. That would be good, and loved by everybody. So basically I'm saying no. Basically I'm saying it's tabula rasa all the way down. Around the little edges of the little area of music, you might have some purchase to use against me, but basically no.
Last question, and maybe as a thank you to our viewers, we can organize this episode to put timestamps when we process it, so you can find your question, you can find specifically where the answer is. And again, a huge thank you both to members and to the super chats. Last super chat, which shows the quality of our audience. So the same person who asked this super complicated question on physics now brings it to politics. I like that. How come Ayn Rand was able to end the draft but not the welfare regulatory state? Both depend on altruism. Also, the understanding of our friend was that it was actually Milton Friedman who ended the draft and not so much Ayn Rand.
No, not at all. No. He might have had some good influence, but I don't think so. The story, for those who don't know it, is that a man named Martin Anderson, who I think just died recently, that I had the pleasure of meeting, was a Harvard graduate student who wrote his PhD thesis in political science on urban renewal. And he began as a liberal, thinking this is a wonderful program. And when he looked at the facts, since he was not a deterministic robot, he chose to think, and he realized, no, it's a disaster. And he wrote a book called The Federal Bulldozer, and either some objectivist discovered him or he discovered objectivism, and he became an objectivist. I'm not sure, you know, a 100% objectivist, but he was, he went to some objectivist events. He worked with Alan Greenspan when Alan Greenspan was an objectivist. And his thing after urban renewal was, let's get rid of the draft. He was in the Nixon administration, and he headed the draft review panel that came up with the recommendation to end the draft. So you could Google Martin Anderson draft and see what you find. How come he was able to do that where you can't do so many other things that should be done? I think because there was the Vietnam War and the left was against the draft, and elements on the right were against the draft. Military leaders were generally against the draft. They saw draftees as bad, making for bad soldiers, which I'm sure they do. You don't want to be there, you're not going to be a good soldier. Also, it was very focused, very, very focused. There's a 2-year period in every male's life where he was exposed to being drafted through a definite procedure. He's registered with an agency. He lived in fear. It's really more than 2 years. It was 2 years that he would serve if drafted, but you became ineligible at 26, so it's 8 years. So it's very visible, hated by the left for a number of reasons, good and bad, and not that strongly advocated on the right. So a person from the right, as we used to use those terms back then, Richard Nixon, was in a position to do it because being a Republican, he had, and president, he had not too much opposition on his right. And all of the leftists wanted it. So that's why.
Thank you very much, Harry. So thanks everyone for your questions. Maybe, by the way, I have many questions that we didn't answer. So we're going to have soon another Q&A episode. So again, a big thank you to the Ayn Rand Institute for sponsoring and supporting these events and for bringing these people who understand objectivism so much deeper than we, the students, do. And someone like Harry, it's a privilege to have him here. So thank you very much, Harry, for your energy and your enthusiasm of doing this. And we're going to see you next week. We don't know the topic yet. We're going to figure it out with Razi.
I have some ideas.
Sorry?
Okay. We'll talk.
Okay. And we're going to see next week. Thanks, everyone, and talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.